You step off a curb just an inch too hard, or perhaps you reach up into the kitchen cabinet to grab a heavy ceramic bowl, and you feel a sudden sharp snap in your wrist. The fear of an unexpected bone fracture is a constant underlying current for almost anyone over the age of 60. You sit in your doctor's office, looking at the color-coded chart from your latest DXA scan. The physician points to a red zone, tells you your bone density has dropped into the osteoporosis range, and hands you a prescription for a class of drugs called bisphosphonates. They tell you it is the standard of care to prevent your skeleton from deteriorating as you age. But there is a biological reality regarding these medications that the pharmaceutical industry rarely discusses openly. They do not build healthy, flexible, youthful bone. To understand why this matters, you have to understand how your skeleton actually works. Your bones are not static pillars of calcium. They are living, dynamic organs constantly undergoing a process called remodeling. You have cells called osteoclasts that operate like a demolition crew, excavating old, damaged bone tissue. Following right behind them are cells called osteoblasts, which act as the construction crew, laying down fresh collagen and minerals. When you take a bisphosphonate drug, the medication specifically targets and suppresses your osteoclasts. It forces the demolition crew to stop working. Because the bone is no longer being broken down, your bone density reading on a DXA scan will appear to stabilize or even increase. However, because you are no longer clearing away the microscopic cracks and damage that occur from daily living, you are left with older, stiffer bone tissue. It may look dense on an X-ray, but it behaves more like brittle chalk than flexible wood. You might temporarily reduce the risk of a minor compression fracture, but you simultaneously increase the risk of atypical fractures, where the femur can simply snap under normal weight because the bone has lost its structural flexibility. The root cause of osteoporosis is not a lack of pharmaceutical drugs in your system. It is an uncoupling of your natural remodeling process, driven by nutrient deficiencies, a lack of specific mechanical signaling, and systemic inflammation. Today, we are going to walk through the physiology of bone regeneration. We will look at 3 natural, scientifically validated interventions that address bone loss at the cellular level, allowing your body to build tissue that is not just dense, but resilient and structurally sound. Before we examine the clinical data and the physiological mechanisms behind these strategies, I want to welcome you to our community. If you are tired of generic medical advice that relies solely on symptom management, and you want to understand the actual biology of how your body ages and heals, consider subscribing to our channel. We focus on evidence-based health strategies that put you back in the driver's seat. I always enjoy learning about the people who tune in, so please drop a comment below and tell me, where are you watching from today, and have you ever felt pressured to start a bone medication without fully understanding how it works? We will start by examining a nutrient that completely changes how your body handles minerals, solving a problem that traditional calcium supplements actually create. For decades, the standard medical advice for preventing bone loss has been to take a calcium supplement, but researchers began to notice a troubling trend in the epidemiological data. Older adults taking high doses of calcium were not necessarily experiencing fewer fractures, but they were showing higher rates of cardiovascular calcification. The calcium they were swallowing was entering their bloodstream, but instead of navigating into their skeleton, it was depositing into the intimal layer of their blood vessels and the soft tissues of their heart valves. The reason for this misdirection comes down to a missing biological traffic controller: vitamin K2. While vitamin K1, found in leafy green vegetables, is responsible for blood clotting, vitamin K2 operates entirely differently. Inside your bone tissue, your osteoblasts synthesize a specific protein called osteocalcin. The role of osteocalcin is to bind calcium ions and integrate them into the collagen matrix of the bone. However, when your cells first produce osteocalcin, it is inactive. It requires a chemical modification called carboxylation to become functional. Vitamin K2 is the essential cofactor for this exact reaction. When vitamin K2 is present, it carboxylates the osteocalcin, effectively switching it on, allowing it to grab circulating calcium and lock it into your skeleton. Simultaneously, vitamin K2 activates a different protein in your blood vessels called matrix GLA protein, which actively prevents calcium from depositing into your arterial walls. The clinical data separating calcium intake from vitamin K2 intake is striking. The Rotterdam study, a large-scale population study tracking over 4,800 older adults for up to 10 years, found that individuals with the highest dietary intake of vitamin K2 experienced a 50% reduction in arterial calcification and cardiovascular mortality. Shifting the focus to bone health, a landmark systematic review and meta-analysis published in the journal Osteoporosis International examined the effects of vitamin K2 supplementation. The researchers found that targeted supplementation with vitamin K2, specifically in the form of menaquinone 4 and menaquinone 7, reduced the incidence of vertebral fractures by 60%, hip fractures by 77%, and all non-vertebral fractures by an astonishing 81%. Further supporting this mechanism is population data from Japan. In the eastern regions of Japan, the traditional diet includes natto, a fermented soybean dish containing the highest natural concentration of vitamin K2 in the world. In the western regions of Japan, natto is rarely consumed. Decades of health data show that the fracture rates in eastern Japan are significantly lower than those in the west, correlating directly with their vitamin K2 intake. Think of your daily calcium intake as a delivery of high-quality bricks dropped at a construction site. Without a foreman to direct the workers, those bricks simply pile up in the road, blocking traffic and causing accidents. Vitamin K2 is the foreman holding the blueprints, directing every single brick to be laid precisely into the foundation of the building. Your actionable takeaway here is to change how you approach mineral supplementation. Taking calcium in isolation is counterproductive if you lack the cofactors to direct it. You need to incorporate vitamin K2 into your routine, ideally the MK7 variant, which has a longer half-life in the bloodstream. A standard clinical dose ranges from 100 to 200 micrograms daily. Because vitamin K2 is a fat-soluble vitamin, it must be consumed with a source of dietary fat to be absorbed through the intestinal wall. Pair your supplement with eggs, avocado, or olive oil. Furthermore, you must ensure you have adequate vitamin D3, as vitamin D is responsible for synthesizing the osteocalcin protein in the first place. Together, vitamin D3 and vitamin K2 ensure that calcium is absorbed from your diet and deposited safely into your bones. Moving on to the physical structure of your skeleton, we have to look at the mechanical signals required to keep bone tissue alive. When bone density begins to decline, the standard advice is to engage in light, low-impact exercise like walking, swimming, or elliptical training. While these activities benefit cardiovascular health, they fail to provide the necessary stimulus for bone regeneration. Your skeleton operates according to Wolff's Law, a principle of anatomy stating that bone in a healthy person will adapt to the loads under which it is placed. Your bones are filled with a network of osteocytes, which are sensory cells embedded deep within the mineralized matrix. These osteocytes possess long dendritic extensions that reach through microscopic canals called canaliculi. When you load a bone with heavy weight, the bone slightly deforms. In biomechanics, this deformation is measured as mechanical strain, defined mathematically as dollar tokens, name var epsilon equal sign, frac delta L, L underscore 0, dollar, where dollar tokens, delta L dollar, is the change in length, and dollar L underscore 0 dollar is the original length. When this strain occurs, the fluid inside the canaliculi network shifts, creating fluid shear stress across the membranes of the osteocytes. The osteocytes detect this shear stress and immediately send biochemical signals to the osteoblasts, commanding them to lay down new bone tissue to reinforce the area against future stress. If the mechanical strain never exceeds the baseline threshold of your body weight, which is what happens when you only walk or swim, the osteocytes remain silent, and your body naturally prunes away the bone tissue to conserve metabolic energy. The resistance to lifting heavy weights among older adults stems from a fear of injury, but clinical trials have proven that properly applied mechanical loading is both safe and necessary. The Lift More trial, published in the Journal of Bone and Mineral Research, specifically tested this mechanism. Researchers recruited postmenopausal women with low bone mass and diagnosed osteoporosis. Instead of assigning them to gentle stretching, the researchers placed them in a supervised high-intensity resistance and impact training program. Twice a week, these women performed barbell deadlifts, overhead presses, and jump drops. They lifted weights exceeding 85% of their one-repetition maximum. The results contradicted decades of conservative medical advice. After 8 months, the women in the high-intensity lifting group increased the bone mineral density in their lumbar spine by 2.9% and in their femoral neck by 0.3%. More importantly, they improved their functional stature and significantly increased their back extensor strength which directly prevents the stooped posture associated with vertebral fractures. The control group, which performed low-intensity, low-impact exercise, continued to lose bone mineral density over the same period. You can visualize your skeletal system like the structural steel of a suspension bridge. If engineers observe that only light bicycles cross the bridge, they will authorize a reduction in the steel framework to save maintenance costs. But if heavy commercial freight trucks begin crossing the bridge daily, the engineers are forced to dispatch crews to reinforce the steel beams with thicker materials to handle the load safely. Your bones behave the exact same way. Your actionable takeaway is to safely introduce heavy mechanical loading into your life. You need to transition away from exclusively doing low-impact aerobics. The goal is to safely apply axial loading to your spine and hips. If you are new to this, hire a qualified physical therapist or a personal trainer trained in geriatric fitness. Learn the mechanics of a proper hinge movement, such as the kettlebell deadlift or the goblet squat. If you cannot access heavy weights, you can introduce impact loading at home. Stand next to a sturdy counter for balance, rise up onto your toes, and drop heavily onto your heels. The physical impact of your heels striking the floor sends a mechanical shockwave directly up your tibia, through your femur, and into your pelvis, manually triggering the fluid shear stress your osteocytes need to signal bone formation. Perform 50 of these heel drops a day to maintain the mechanical signaling your skeleton requires. If you are finding this breakdown of cellular biology helpful, and you appreciate moving past generic advice into the actual mechanics of human health, please take a moment to click the like button on this video. It signals to the platform that this information has value, allowing it to reach other older adults who are looking for evidence-based alternatives to pharmaceutical management. Finally, we need to address the biochemical environment surrounding your bones, specifically the role of oxidative stress and systemic inflammation. The remodeling process we discussed earlier relies on a delicate balance between the bone-building osteoblasts and the bone-destroying osteoclasts. As we age, particularly as estrogen and testosterone levels decline, our immune system undergoes shifts that increase the baseline production of inflammatory cytokines, such as interleukin-6 and tumor necrosis factor alpha. These inflammatory molecules act on a specific signaling pathway in the bone marrow called the RANKL pathway. When the RANKL pathway is upregulated by inflammation, it causes the rapid proliferation and activation of osteoclasts. The demolition crew goes into overdrive. Your body begins breaking down bone tissue significantly faster than it can replace it. To stop this accelerated breakdown, you have to alter the inflammatory environment. This is where the specific biochemistry of polyphenols comes into play. Polyphenols are naturally occurring micronutrients found in certain plants that exhibit strong antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties. Researchers examining dietary interventions for osteoporosis discovered that dried plums, commonly known as prunes, contain a unique matrix of phenolic compounds, notably neochlorogenic and chlorogenic acids. These specific compounds act as powerful scavengers for reactive oxygen species. By neutralizing the oxidative stress in the cellular environment, the polyphenols suppress the inflammatory cytokines. This suppression downregulates the RANKL pathway, effectively forcing the hyperactive osteoclasts to slow down and return to a normal rate of activity, allowing the osteoblasts a chance to catch up and rebuild the tissue. The clinical evidence supporting this dietary intervention is substantial. A comprehensive clinical trial conducted at Florida State University and published in the British Journal of Nutrition tested the efficacy of dried plums on postmenopausal women. The researchers divided the participants and had the intervention group consume between 50 and 100 grams of dried plums daily, roughly equivalent to 5 to 10 prunes. After 1 year, the researchers measured the biomarkers of bone metabolism. The women consuming the dried plums showed a 20% reduction in serum markers associated with bone resorption, specifically TRAP5B. Furthermore, DXA scans confirmed that the women consuming the prunes had successfully preserved their bone mineral density in the ulna and the lumbar spine, whereas the control group experienced continued bone loss. The study concluded that the specific polyphenols in the fruit actively suppress the rate of bone turnover driven by inflammation. Imagine a city block where a rogue demolition crew is tearing down buildings every single night, while the construction workers can only work during the day. No matter how hard the builders work, the city slowly turns to rubble. Introducing these specific polyphenols is the equivalent of pulling the permits on the demolition crew, forcing them to halt their nighttime operations, finally giving the builders the time and peace they need to erect new structures. Your actionable takeaway here is straightforward. Incorporate 5 to 6 dried plums into your daily diet. This is not a generalized recommendation for eating more fruit. It is a targeted intervention using a specific food that alters the genetic expression of your bone cells. Because prunes contain natural sugars, you want to manage the glycemic load to avoid blood sugar spikes. Pair your daily serving of dried plums with a source of protein and fat. You can chop them and mix them into full-fat Greek yogurt, blend them into a protein shake, or eat them alongside a handful of raw almonds. By making this a daily habit, you provide your skeletal system with the continuous biochemical support required to quench the inflammation that drives bone loss. We have covered the physiological realities of bone regeneration today, stepping far outside the limitations of standard pharmaceutical management. We explored the critical necessity of vitamin K2, explaining how it carboxylates osteocalcin to direct calcium out of your blood vessels and into your skeletal matrix, resulting in profound reductions in fracture risk. We examined the biomechanics of Wolff's Law, detailing how heavy mechanical loading and fluid shear stress trigger your osteocytes to build new bone, a mechanism proven by the impressive density gains in the Liftmore trial. We also broke down the inflammatory pathways that drive osteoclast hyperactivity, showing how the targeted use of polyphenols found in dried plums can safely downregulate bone resorption and preserve your existing skeletal mass. You do not have to accept the narrative that aging dictates a slow, inevitable decline into physical fragility. Your skeleton is a highly responsive, adaptable organ system. When you understand the biochemistry of mineral transport, the mechanics of cellular signaling, and the impact of inflammation, you regain the ability to influence your own health outcomes. You possess the biological machinery to repair and reinforce your bones, provided you supply the correct inputs. Aging should not be defined by a fear of movement or a reliance on medications that merely alter your X-ray results without improving your structural integrity. You have the right to maintain your strength, your posture, and your independence. I would love to hear your thoughts on the biological mechanisms we covered today. Please leave a comment below and let me know which of these 3 physiological interventions makes the most sense to you, and how do you plan to incorporate it into your routine this week. If you found this breakdown of the science valuable and empowering, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Understanding your biology is the first step toward reclaiming your independence. Keep asking questions, keep challenging the standard advice when it falls short, and remember that you have the capacity to build a stronger, more resilient foundation at any age.